Starlink internet is going from rural savior to unreliable luxury. All these talks about Starlink greater than remember it's a band-aid solution to your government's poor planning and infrastructure rollout of a core utility service. I say this as an Australian who watched one government plan a national rollout of fiber, while another came in justifying most people don't need a connection better than 25/5, based on usage data at the time, and went ahead and gutted the project. We're now trying to undo the previous government's mess up of the original rollout post-COVID world, when everyone discovered remote work is a good idea for many. Starlink's issue feels like history repeating itself with any service that becomes popular and goes too quickly into high demand.
Meanwhile, here I am in the Netherlands, semi-rural I'd say, having 2 fiber modems installed because we have 2 competing fiber networks here. At least one of them goes to 2,000, 500, 2,000, 500s for about 75 a month. Probably it'll go much higher in the future.
2.5 gigabytes as symmetrical is a sweet deal. Here in Italy, in a town of 3K people, I got only a 1 GB as symmetrical. But so far I can't complain. It costs months, so it's a pretty great deal.
All these talks about Starlink, greater than remember it's a band-aid solution to your government's poor planning and infrastructure rollout of a core utility service. Partially. The thing is, the US is so unbelievably huge that it is economically infeasible to serve extremely rural areas with high-speed wired, i.e. fiber, DSL, or wireless, microwave, GG phone, internet, even with massive government subsidies, and that applies for other large area countries such as Germany or Australia as well. Starlink completely changes the equations there as, for the user, no investment is required, other than getting a terminal, and for anything mobile, sea ships, RVs, emergency services, it blows the competition from geostationary satellites completely away.
Other large area countries such as Germany or Australia as well. Putting Germany in the same category as Australia or the US seems a bit weird when the former two have truly continental dimensions, whereas Germany is a bit smaller than California. Although there's an interesting twist. Going by population-weighted density, Australia definitively comes out ahead, and even the US is somewhat denser than Germany in that regard. Though on the other hand the United Kingdom is much denser population-weighted wise than all three of them. And yet from what I've gathered, it's no perfect shining example of high-speed broadband rollout either.
Yes, the US is huge, but if an area can get power, we should be able to roll out fiber along the same routes. It just takes a bit of work.
Last-mile rural connectivity will never reach everybody in the USA. It's just too many people to service. Obama's net neutrality, which thankfully got shit-canned, was going to mandate free service for the poor for all new startups, among other considerations, which would have made making a new rural ISP a complete non-starter. If you want internet, you can pay for it.
Last-mile rural electrification will never reach everybody in the USA. It's just too many people to service. Roosevelt would have mandated free service for the poor for all new startups, among other considerations, which would have made making a rural electrical utility a complete non-starter. If you want electricity, you can pay for it.
Many rural areas do not have power and never will.
I have Starlink in an Airbnb in Puerto Escondido, Mexico. It has been a blessing. It used to be that we had to deal with either cell carrier 4G Wi-Fi, or wait until the phone company would finally extend service 1 block away from its current service area. Even if you had access to either, both solutions were pretty bad. They were so unreliable that some co-working spaces had 3 providers: broadband, 4G and old-school satellite. Starlink arrived last year in earnest, and really life-changing. It even dropped the price some months ago. The internet just works. Anything that bypasses local monopolies and government stasis will get my business with true joy.
I'm pretty sure you can't just launch satellites into orbit randomly without government blessing it, or stream data to ground stations legally. E.g., India doesn't like satellite phones. At a certain point, Starlink could itself be the monopoly you dread.
So Starlink has been so effective and so popular that, utterly unsurprisingly, it is becoming more congested and they're raising rates. This is good news and not bad. It's a strong sign that the model fundamentally works and they will be able to fund continuous improvements to meet strong demand.
No, It's not a strong sign of that, it's a strong sign that with VC money and government money, you can offer unrealistic service at unrealistic prices, but when you need to start showing that you are profitable, and launching satellites to maintain the current network is also expensive, both your service and prices start to get more in line with what everybody else already had. The honeymoon phase of Starlink is over. In the best case scenario with Starship, they can add capacity much cheaper, but even the business case for that is going to be hard to close, given the amount of money they're already burning.
FWIW, that is what Starlink has been saying themselves. Their operations have always been linked to cheaper launches. My opinion is that it is easy to get sidetracked when your leader gets stuck in political activism.
Do cheap launches help when spectral bandwidth over an area is going to be the true limitation? Starlink's problem is going to be that most profitable areas are better served by terrestrial LTE 5G, leaving only truly remote areas that are low density enough. But not many people live there.
Do cheap launches help when spectral bandwidth over an area is going to be the true limitation? Spectral bandwidth doesn't matter so much with beamforming with reasonably narrow beams. At least not until you get to a lot of satellites overhead at once. Dishy probably obtains a beam 3 degrees wide. There's a lot of 3 by 3 degree sectors in the sky. Similarly, the ground cells are square km. There's a lot of these in view of the satellite. Starlink's problem is going to be that most profitable areas are better served by terrestrial LTE 5G. Yup, for the most part I agree. Still, there is a pretty large rural population.
Well, 3 degrees wide means at best 28 square degrees on the sky, star 3 times 3. But the problem is the other way. It looks like Starlink has 7 GHz total downlink bandwidth from satellite to customers. A cell may be square km, but no way you can pipe all that bandwidth in adjacent cells due to interference. Or, if you did, you'd probably lose in spectral efficiency. If we assume something like 10 Gbps cell total downlink bandwidth, based on 2 polarizations, 1/4 the total bandwidth, and 3 bits H the efficiency, then you can maybe serve 500 people cell reasonably. How many people live in places with fewer than a few people care? Only Alaska averages below that in the US.
It looks like Starlink has 7 GHz total downlink bandwidth from satellite to customers. I think you meant 7 Gbps. That only works if the satellite itself has that much inbound, which may not be the case if the satellite's around. For sat-to-sat links, it, or the base station that it sees, are maxed out.
7 GHz is correct. 2 GHz of X-band and 5 GHz of Ca5 band for downlink to subscribers. Multiply by spectral efficiency, perhaps 5 bits HZ. Which may not be the case if the satellite's around, for sat-to-sat links. No real sat-to-sat links yet. The exact specifications aren't disclosed, but they'll likely be 100 Gbps symmetric links. The base station that it sees are maxed out. You can expect spectral efficiency for the uplinks to be better because of big antennas, and for them to be provisioned with no problem illuminating all the satellites overhead. Almost all of Starlink's competitors are completely dependent on government money. The FCC spends billions a year cutting checks to rural ISPs to subsidize them. The FCC took Starlink's subsidies away because the Biden admin hates Musk now. But I think Musk will still beat many of these clown companies anyway.
Your history is a bit off. The FCC commissioner and FCC has generally loved SpaceX. And they were not appointed by Biden. What happened was SpaceX continually got worse in the FCC SAMNOS testing. So much so, that their original application for $900 million was far from the service they actually offered. For that reason, they paused the funding until SpaceX improved things to the point they promised. They still have not improved and have continued declining.
Here in Japan, Starlink price is continuously down, now $50 because only richer techie people, of course they have fiber and live in metropolis, buy it, and they don't use much. FTTH coverage is really comprehensive even in very rural area, so there are very few residential practical use case. It would be excellent for camping. It seems that it practically priced.
Satellite internet essentially means that you have to share one cell phone tower with your entire district. I don't see how this can be sustainable for anything but the most rural areas.
Well, why would anyone in an urban area need something Starlink when there are already plenty of cheap and reliable alternatives, including alternatives at higher bandwidths? The problem with building your company around rural internet is that there just aren't that many people to spread the cost around, Thus, whatever the alternative is very expensive.
The sentiment has been, up until this point, that Starlink needs to lower costs for the customers, not increase them, as otherwise the customer base will remain as tiny as it currently is. Last I remember, the cost was $500 plus the monthly fee. I wonder how many in a rural environment are ready to pony that up for a measly connection. Maybe not difficult for live-on-a-farm software developers, but what about the rest of the spare population?
Last I remember, the cost was $500 plus the monthly fee. I wonder how many in a rural environment are ready to pony that up for a measly connection. Maybe not difficult for live-on-a-farm software developers, but what about the rest of the spare population? If you think $500 setup cost plus the $90 monthly fee is bad, I got news for you. The same people using Starlink out in the middle of nowhere now were paying way more than that before switching. Like $250 for subpar speeds, and had very small data limit caps, plus data usage overage costs with crap ISPs.
It went up only $10 per month in congested areas, and went down by $20 in uncongested areas. It's still $90 if you are rural. They are trying to encourage against people using the service in urban congested areas. Starlink, at least right now, is not ideal for urban situations. That's not very surprising. Maybe with newer general SATs capacity will raise. But if not, it's not an unreliable luxury. It's still perfect for rural situations.
Starlink was designed for, and has always been intended for remote people, who literally have no other connection option. No cable, no 3G or 4G. If you can get those other options, Starlink is not a product designed for you. Go remote, and Starlink is an absolute game changer, without even a remotely close equal.
No offense, but this perspective doesn't apply worldwide. If you live in a country like Australia, a Starlink connection will give you 10x the speed of many NBN, National Broadband Network, wired connections. GG are metered by MB, and not a viable option for a daily WAN link due to that. Unless you were lucky enough to get fiber pulled into your house before the government at the time kneecapped the NBN, you have a link that is comparable in cost and speed. Most consumers here do not have that link.
So much this. I'm on Starlink in Sydney because Australia's NBN decided to stop their fiber rollout 600 meters from my house and decided that the only option they would provide me is old geostationary satellite. 4G reception is middling with pathetic data caps. I get 5G reception too, but none of the providers will offer home broadband services, only mobile Wi-Fi. On Starlink I get 250 Mbps down at a price only marginally higher than what I would be paying to get the same speed on a fixed line connection. I can't be the only one in a situation like mine. Prime candidates for Starlink. The NBN closed quotes for running fiber to my residence. Even if I had the tens of thousands to pay for them to run the cable, they won't even consider taking my money currently.
Take a look at 5G extended range FWA. That's what Starlink is competing against. Proprietary versions of similar capability are well proven, but 5G-based extended range FWA enables interoperation, standardization, and competition.